Can I have your attention, please? We'll be starting up shortly. Good evening, and welcome to the Lowell Planning Board for November 4th, 2013. Tonight we have a couple of matters on, 2 public hearings, a few matters for approval of minutes, and some other matters under other business and old business. Before I begin the public hearings, I'd like to turn the matter over at this point in time to Mr. Jerry Fischette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to have a moment of silence for Richard Souza, who passed away last week. Dick was a beloved husband, father, and grandfather. I first met Dick Souza 16 years ago in these very council chambers, and we were here to argue against a rezoning in our neighborhood. And Dick and I became very good friends. Dick and I both served shortly after that on the board of the Pawtuckaville Citizens Council, became officers. Dick was my co-chair for many years. Dick argued before the Zoning Board of Appeals when the very first cell towers were coming into the city, made a very articulate argument against the potential health issues, and this was a cell tower going into one of our local hospitals. The Zoning Board of Appeals actually denied the request, and it was overturned by the courts, but sent back to the ZBA, and the then chair, who's here this evening, Mr. Kasanjan, was very kind to have us sit with Dave Fenton, so Dave Fenton could explain the merits of what was happening, and that although it was a very articulate argument, that we couldn't deny it for that reason. Dick was one of the very first people to go forward with something like that. Dick was a quiet soldier for the Pawtuckaville Citizens Council, attended numerous ZBA meetings, planning board meetings, conservation commission meetings. Dick Souza, myself, Tommy Golan, and the engineer for the state were at a conservation meeting for over 3 hours on the boat ramp that everybody enjoys up there today. Dick served on the Pawtuckaville Master Plan, and Mr. Boyle's here, and he can attest to the commitment that was. That was several years to put together the master plan. Dick participated in the neighborhood cleanups, always brought his grandson along, instilled neighborhood pride into the next generation. He handed out flyers. We handed out over 250 flyers after the first flood that we had in Pawtuckaville. Again, it was the quiet things that Dick was willing to do. Didn't want to get recognized for it, but it knew the job had to get done. I'm truly a better person for having known Dick, and I truly believe the city of Lowell is a better place for people like Dick Souza to be living here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fischette. Moving along, our first public hearing is for a site plan review of 150 Wood Street. The Lowell Planning Board will hold a public hearing to hear all interested persons relative to an application by Kasanjan Enterprise seeking site plan review for development located at the above address. The proposal consists of 2 new commercial buildings, preservation of the existing residential building, and construction of a parking lot with access from Wood Street and Westford Street. The proposed project is located in the suburban mixed-use zoning district and requires site plan review with the planning board under section 11.4.2 of the Lowell zoning ordinance. May we hear from the applicant, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We would like to continue this petition for the next meeting if it's possible. We're working with DPD, making a few changes at the requests on the plan and the site.
Could you just identify yourself for the record, please?
Oh, Al Kasanjan, owner of Kasanjan Enterprise.
Okay. I know we did receive a lot of feedback from planning staff. I was speaking with planning staff today. The only question I would have is, I know you plan on getting new plans to them. How soon do you think you get the new plans to them?
We're going to try to get them Wednesday or Thursday by the latest, if that's possible, if that works for all of you.
Because what I was speaking with Aaron today would be, due to the fact that we'd be coming up in 2 weeks, and we have the holiday from November 11th, the time, if they could get the plans by Wednesday at the latest, it would give them time to make their comments and give them to the other department heads.
Okay.
Think that could be feasible for the,
We're going to try our best.
because if not, if you couldn't get them by that date, then the other alternative would be to put it on for the following meeting.
We have a timeline as far as purchasing the property, so we kind of like to get in there as soon as we can. I talked to the engineers, they feel pretty confident we can get it by Wednesday.
Is there anybody here this evening who's here for this project? Okay. All right, so let me entertain first whether we're going to entertain the motion to continue. Any of the board members have any comments, requests, or?
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we continue the matter until the November 18th Planning Board meeting.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so who's ever here this evening, or for the future date, the matter will be on for November 18th, 2013, and that'll be at 6 o'clock, which is 2 weeks from tonight. So hopefully you can get those plans in and we can go forward that evening.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board members.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mr. Danza. Okay. Moving along on, next matter, we have a zoning amendment. This is Rogers Street Corridor. A public hearing will be held to hear all interested persons relative to the proposed zoning amendment to extend the traditional mixed-use zoning district to include properties with frontage along the northerly side of Rogers Street, between and including 576 and 688 Rogers Street, as well as the entirety of 39 Whitehead Ave, 550 Douglas Road, and 458 Wentworth Ave. Excuse me. All properties currently located with the regional retail zoning district. This matter is before us for a recommendation only. After this vote this evening, the matter will go back before the city council, and the city council will have the ultimate decision on the request for the zoning change. The matter was before the city council on September 24th, 2013, and the following ordinance was read, and it was referred back to the planning board, adopted with the language that was approved by one of the assistant city solicitors. So it is here tonight for a recommendation before us. I'm just checking to see. Okay, so that was sent back. Okay, so can we hear from anybody this evening who's in favor of the zoning or against the zoning? Just come up, state your name, and tell us if you're in favor or against.
Good evening, Attorney George Theodore, representing POTA Stylus, who's the owner of 683 Rogers Street. If you remember, there was a similar amendment that was before the planning board and the council over the summer. And that proposed zoning amendment applied to both sides of the street, the northerly and southern side of Rogers Street, as affected by this piece of Rogers Street. That was not successful. And what happened after that, I presume, is another recommendation was made to present a zoning amendment that will apply to the side of Rogers Street that abuts the residential neighborhood. So a decision was made to exclude the section across the street. Now, I spoke against it then on behalf of my client, that it was wrong, that the zoning amendment served no specific purpose. And I had argued and discussed that there was a master plan that was put in place by the city in which the zoning citywide was studied. And the specific zoning in this area was RR. And I presume that after that exhaustive study of the master plan, they decided to leave it RR for a reason, that they found no valid reason to change the zoning in that area. I also pointed out at the city council hearing that this specific strip of Rogers Street is slated in the master plan for commercial development. And the commercial development that is proposed in this strip of land is commercial development in an RR zone. And there's a distinction with that. Furthermore, we have some property owners that may have purchased the property who are property that was designated as an RR zone. They may have purchased it for a specific reason, and then later on, the zoning has changed, and I would submit to you that the values are affected. It's a detriment to their property interests. Now, what you have here is a very dangerous precedent in that you have a motivation to change the zoning in a busy commercial section that abuts a residential neighborhood. And what is to prevent another neighborhood organization to come here before this board for a recommendation to change another commercial zone that abuts their residential neighborhood? These commercial zones serve the community, their taxpayers, and their rights are extremely important to the tax base of the city. So I would request that this board do not make a favorable recommendation to the council. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor.
My name's Richard Barrett. I reside at 39 Whitehead Ave, and I own Kilkenny Pub at 660 Rogers Street. As I said at the last meeting, as Attorney Theodore stated, I'd asked you to leave the zoning the way it is, as opposed to changing it. I bought the business and the house, which is zoned commercial because of that. I've lived in the neighborhood in the city my entire life, and I think there's enough things in place. When the Taco Bell, they were able to stop it. I think there's enough things in place if a project did come along where they could stop it. So I ask you if you could leave the zoning the way it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
So, Mr. Barrow, what business do you own?
Kilkenny Pub at 660 Rogers Street.
Yep, thank you.
My name is Dominic Introvaya. I'm a trustee for GIM Realty Trust. We have the property at 590 and 638 Rogers. Now, this proposal to change the zoning, I can't understand why. There is nothing planned for the area, and why do they want to let the city collect less taxes? Doesn't make sense to me. By changing the zoning from R&R to TMZ causes less taxes for the city. The city needs all the revenue they can take in. They don't want to have somebody pay less taxes. Be nice to pay less taxes, but not for that reason. So therefore, I am against this proposal to change the zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to speak?
Hi, Steve Lehman with 213 Parkview. And I understand some of the concerns of the business owners along Rogers, and I'm speaking in support of making those zoning changes. The usage along there, if regional retail is developed to the extent that regional retail could be, the road simply doesn't support that. The amount of traffic, the trucks that would have to come back and forth. In addition to that, there's really no buffer between really what is a much more active commercial area than it is now, and the local neighborhood and the local residential area. And I understand that the dangerous precedent that the first speaker identified the idea of creep, and we as residents are concerned about the same thing from a different perspective. I mean, we're concerned about heavier and heavier regional commercial activity in that area. The traffic is considerable now. There are a lot of kids that walk up and down that street. You're moving from a 4-lane road at Rogers and Phoenix to a 2-lane road as you come into the area that we're discussing to have rezoned. The area on the south of Rogers, from that Dunkin' Donuts back east, borders along industrially zoned property. It makes sense for that to stay as regional retail. The retail establishments that are on the north side are, again, bordering along residential properties. They're commercial properties that are heavily used by the local residents as opposed to regional customers coming off the highway. So I'm speaking in support of the zoning change that's ahead of you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Richard Coffey. I live at 331 Parkview Avenue, abutting the current zone. I am here in favor of the proposed zoning change and hope that you will recommend it to the council. We believe that in the zoning change made in around 2005, which changed this to regional retail, was a mistake to begin with. The zoning in that neighborhood was a medium business type zone, not a heavy business zone. The lot size supports smaller sized businesses. It's my belief that zoning exists for an orderly development in a stable environment, and that this would help that. That would bring us back to where we were, where we're supposed to be, that we have a residential neighborhood. One of the previous speakers spoke about the possible creep effect. The current situation is a horrible creep effect. If we go back a few years, from the Oakland Firehouse down to the corner of Wentworth was residential, both sides. Not much of that is still residential. So it's the businesses that are creeping into the residences, not the residences trying to creep back into the businesses. Back in 2005, the neighbors were not consulted about this. There was a master plan that covered the whole city that all of a sudden got voted in and kind of took us by surprise. So we're hoping that, this change here will support the quality of life in the neighborhood. The proposed zoning, by the way, is commercial. TMU is a commercial zone. Make no mistake about it. We're not trying to throw the businesses out. We like them. We patronize them. Whether there's a change in value, that's very, very iffy. If this was so, the city should probably be taxing me for about 3 or 4 times what my house is currently being taxed at. God forbid. I'm also taken aback by basically the owner of a residence whose only reason to oppose this would be if he wanted to throw his residence out to put in a store. I mean, what kind of promotion of quality of life in the city is that? This would stabilize the neighborhood and promote the quality of life in the city. So we hope that you would support this and recommend it to the council so that we have a better Lowell to live in. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to speak?
Good evening. I'm Ed Zappella. I live at 317 Parkview Avenue. I have for the last 40 years. I think the only people that exceed my term of residence are the Coffeys. They were there maybe a year before I got there. But anyway, over the 40 years, I've seen a lot of proposals come before the chamber here, purportedly many for my benefit. Sadly, not too many worked out that way. I think this proposal is revenue neutral at this point. not going to cost anybody more taxes. It may impact future expansion, but that would be at our detriment and their benefit. And as Dick said, Richard said, there's really no harm to the current businesses on the street. And what it will do is preserve the character of the neighborhood. And I think that's a very important aspect that would like to continue. So I'm voting in, or I'm here to voice my, what's the word I'm looking for? Support. Support, yes. Pardon me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to speak?
Hi, I'm Terry Dillingham. I live at 154 Parkview Ave, and I would also like to speak in support of recommending to the council for the amendment change. We've been having these discussions for some time now, and I think it's amazing. I don't think anyone disagrees that we want this area to be a thriving commercial area that supports the residential space around it. And I hear everyone saying the same thing. So it's what's the best way to do that? That side of Rogers Street, the reality of it is they're smaller lots. They are not suitable for regional retail. It's just not the right zoning for this area. And unfortunately, we've become aware of this through efforts by the owners to create commercial enterprises there that are not appropriate for the space and the traffic and has been discussed before. And so it seems to just make sense that this should be, the change should be SMU. We've talked about the neighborhood and how we want to support it, how the area goes from Shed Park to Colley Stadium, and it really is a thoroughfare into the city from the highway. We don't need Home Depot right down the street. I love having my dentist there, and that's a really big difference. And to be honest, it makes a really big difference in considering whether we want to stay in the neighborhood. The Taco Bell situation that this is like 2.5 years now. That would have significantly degraded the quality of life in our neighborhood. And that was something that having it zoned regional retail would have permitted, had it not been that they were trying to put a facility in there that just was too big for the property. Then we became aware that there was an effort to consolidate some of the parcels into a larger parcel that could facilitate some national box chain. Again, this is just not appropriate use of that space. We, again, love the commercial aspect as long as it really is supporting the neighborhood. And I think the idea of the decrease in revenue, when you look at the differences between the zoning, sorry, I'm really close to this. There's only about 24 uses that change. So 12, about half, a dozen get added and a dozen get taken away. And if you look at what gets taken away, that really is the only difference in value for those property owners. So if the only decrease in value, if now, as a result of the zoning change, they can't do something. And these are the types of things, a drive-through theater, a manufacturing and reconditioning processing plant, a food and beverage manufacturing plant, a large wind energy facility, a radio or television transmission station. These things just aren't appropriate for that area. And so as a result, I think the change makes sense. I don't think it will be to the detriment of anybody. All of the current uses are grandfathered in, and I think it would really benefit the neighborhood. I know I would like to stop having to come and argue every time someone wants to put something in there that doesn't make sense for the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else like to speak?
Hi, I'm Joan Barrett of Lowell, Mass. And I would like to say your minds are not really made up, but I remember from the last meeting, it was pretty much majority that was ready to vote in favor of this motion. And then at the end of it, you decided, well, let's pass it on to the council. So I think you've heard plenty about both sides, and both sides can be argued. So I feel as though, since I've lived in the city all my life, own a home, my 4 adult children own homes in the city. So personally, I think it would be wonderful if the planning board would vote to allow the Rogers Street properties to keep their retail zone classification. I would say at the time of purchase of Kilkenny Pub by Richard Barrett, who is my son, it was zoned retail, as it had been for many years. I don't know how many. I would say that the highest and best use of the business is for it to remain in the retail zone. The city of Lowell markets itself to be welcoming new businesses, I think. So it doesn't seem reasonable to me that the board would take a stand to remove an important classification from the current businesses. So I'd like to say, please allow these property owners on Rogers Street to maintain the current zoning and to focus on running their businesses. And the mention of the Taco Bell business, the regular zoning regulations took care of that. No trouble, 1, 2, 3. The others that she mentioned, I didn't know about groups going together. I don't know if that was an official thing, trying to put something big in there. But I would say, certainly a drive-through, I'm not talking for a drive-through. I'm talking about if you're a small business owner, which my son is, and my daughter is a business owner in Lowell too, it's expensive to hire lawyers, which we did not do for this, to come down here and argue your changes for signs, for different things. There's a lot of things in that zoning change, not simply saying, oh, you can't have a drive-through. So I'd like, if you can, to really think carefully, because this is really important to me, and I would hope that you would look carefully and let the retail people keep their zoning and run their business. Thanks.
Thank you.
Denise Coffey, 331 Parkview Avenue. I'm a little confused with some of the businesses. They're talking about losing, and my understanding is that they're grandfathered in and that things aren't going to change for them. And just to speak to the idea of a grand plan, we lived right next door to Jilly's, and we went through the Taco Bell thing and fought against that. Obviously, we were very much concerned about it. But after the Taco Bell thing was over, about 6 months later, we received a letter from a local realtor asking us if we would be interested in selling our property, and that it was an all or nothing deal, that we, the 2 houses behind us and the properties in front of us, would be sold. And obviously what they were trying to do was create a larger area. And that certainly doesn't benefit the neighborhood. And as tempting as it might be, personally, we just had no interest in it. So again, I don't understand why everybody's all upset if all the businesses that are there are grandfathered.
Good evening. My name is Trina Picardi. I live at 151 Parkview, and I'm here this evening to speak in support of changing the zoning from regional retail to traditional mixed use. I won't go through everything that the Coffeys and Terry and Stephen Lehman had said. I guess I would argue that as the council considers this and moves it on to the city council for recommendation, we are not setting a dangerous precedent. Rather, we're having an open dialogue, and if another neighborhood comes forward somewhere in Lowell or anywhere in the state of Massachusetts to challenge something like this, this is what these venues are for. So I would say that anyone who comes before you, that you're not setting a precedent. You're looking at a very small parcel of land and a correction to the zoning. In terms of the Taco Bell, and you can say that it wasn't, it was not 1-2-3. That was a very close vote. It only was denied by one vote. And to quote one of the city councilors, he does not think it's the neighborhood's responsibility when they have an issue like this to continue to come up and fight. So it was actually pointed out by one of the city council when we were in front, who was in support of this, to grant the neighborhood what they were looking for, which is us not returning every other year or every 3 years to continue to fight this. So again, I believe this is a correction to the change to the zoning, not necessarily carving out anything specific. There are residences in this zoning right now, which if you look at the definition of regional retail, you would not even be allowed to have a residence. And I think that's it. So thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Celine Lehman. I live at 213 Parkview Avenue, and I want to express my support for the change in the zoning. I agree with the other speakers that we have no interest in inhibiting the current businesses. We use those businesses. We're happy to have them there. What we're trying to do is protect the neighborhood from, as we said, a number of people have said, from creep. We want to keep the positive feeling in the neighborhood. There were lots of issues that came up in the Taco Bell process that were a little nerve-wracking. Things like how the trucks would have to go through the neighborhood, coming through Andover Street instead of on Rogers Street. That the fact that there was a bus stop right in that property. There were all kinds of things that came up at the very end of the process, and we were fortunate enough to be able to stop that particular petition. But we're concerned that a larger business could come in and make a big difference on that street. We are very happy to have the folks in that are there. We don't have the right to change what they have. They would be grandfathered. In addition, I wondered if I would be able to read an email from Steve Hatan. He sent, he is a neighborhood, in the neighborhood, and was not able to make the meeting. So I wondered if that would be all right.
That'd be fine, ma'am.
Said the current zoning, the regional retail zoning in this area was implemented in 2005, and at that time, he believes the neighborhood at large was not consulted or given notice of the consequences. The regional retail zone does not fit for this area, and change into TMU is much more in line with what's there now and what ought to be allowed there in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Lou Stylis. I live at 24 Holyrood. I also used to live on 683 Rogers Street for many years. That's the house that I grew up on. Excuse me, I just came from the airport, so I'm just trying to catch my breath. I would like to voice my opposition to this ordinance. I spoke against it in the original format that included the other side of Rogers Street. I still think that this does impact the city's tax base adversely. At the time that this was being discussed, there was a lot of discussion by city councilors about getting information. What I would ask is, has any information been gotten? There's a lot of opinions. I talked to realtors and they said that any kind of change like this does dramatically affect the property values of the owners, of the business owners. I'm just wondering, at the time that this was sent back in the previous form, the city councilors wanted to get more information about that in a more definitive way versus hearsay. And I just would like to pose that when you have your discussion about this. The other thing is, I do think that it does impact the owners that have put their sweat and toil into these properties, their businesses. It does affect their livelihoods. And I do think that the board needs to be aware of that. These are people that have paid taxes for decades. As I said, I lived on the street. I live around the corner from the street. They've been there for a long, long time. And I don't see the need with the safeguards that are already in place to make a change to the zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I'm Attorney Ellen Collins. I live at 212 Parkview Avenue. My family has lived at that address since 1962, believe it or not. I remember when we could walk to Glenny's Ice Cream on Rogers Street and didn't have to worry about crossing the street. Way back when. That's rather beside the point because things have changed since then. And, you know, along with my neighbors, I'm very happy to have commercial activity on Rogers Street that generates jobs and taxes for the city. However, those uses are grandfathered, and there's no attempt to, diminish the current retail activity on Rogers Street now. I'm here to support the amendment because I think it really raises, the existing zoning raises public safety issues. After many years, our neighborhood now has young families with small children in it who, run up and down the street to Shed Park. I recall that one neighbor had a child who was riding a bicycle through Oakland Square to the park and was hit by someone who blew through the red light while talking on a cell phone. On the other side of that, we also have a large population of elderly people. My father is 82, and it's been a very stable neighborhood because we have, 7 neighbors, all up there in years, who've been there for as long as my parents have been there. For them, the problem is traffic. You cannot get from the end of Parkview Avenue onto Rogers Street because Rogers Street is inadequate to deal with the traffic as it exists today. The last thing that our neighborhood needs is for people to bundle their parcels of land together and sell out to a big box. It would destroy the neighborhood. I mean, as it is, to go to Market Basket, the quickest way on a map would be to go down Parkview and up Rogers. Well, the traffic is so bad, as it is, one goes the other direction down Parkview, all the way down Hovey and over Clark. Similarly, to get onto Route 495, we're residents of the neighborhood. We can't use the Route 38 entrance and exit. To go north, we go to 133. To go south on 495, we go to Woburn Street because the traffic is so bad now. So I support the zoning amendment. I think it will preserve the quality of our neighborhood. It will make it safer for children and the elderly. And I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Anyone else? Can no one else at this point in time? I'll turn it over to the board members. Any questions, comments? Mr. Gentleman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this issue has been before us many times before. I think we all kind of know the lay of the land here by now, and I don't think it's any secret that I support this change. This is not a change. This is really not a change. This is not an effort to make any change. It's an effort to keep things the same. This TMU, everybody's throwing around the fact that things are grandfathered. Nothing, very little has to be grandfathered here. All of these businesses that are currently there can operate as is and conforming to the TMU zone. The only things that need grandfathering are the drive-throughs that are there now, the fast food drive-throughs at Wendy's and the fast food drive-throughs at Jilly's. Those uses are not allowed in a TMU. They would be grandfathered. But everything else, you know, a dentist office, a florist, a pizza shop, a pub, all of those businesses, a convenience store, all of those neighborhood businesses are perfectly conforming in a TMU zone. And we talked about the, and as a matter of fact, there are some uses now, like the gentleman who has the bar and the house right behind the bar. That's a non-conforming use in a regional retail zone. This change would make that use conforming. You can't have that residential house with your pub in a regional retail zone by our code. So it's currently non-conforming. This would change that. There's a 26-unit apartment building that's currently in that zone. It's non-conforming in a regional retail zone. This change would make it conforming. This section of the roadway already has the characteristics of a TMU zone, with a couple of minor exceptions. So this is not a vote to change anything at all. This is a vote to keep it the same. And the neighborhood group has come out here and has been driving this, and I applaud them for sticking with this, because this has been a long haul, and a lot of people would give up. But they've come out here because they want to protect their neighborhood, and I think it's admirable. It's not a dangerous precedent at all. If another neighborhood group comes before this board or before the city council with an argument that's equally as good as this one, then that ought to be changed too. I think this is a very valid argument, and it's a compromise now. What's happened over the discussion that took place over the past couple of years is that it was made obvious that some of the original parcels didn't border any residential uses at all. They bordered light industrial use only. So those were cut out. So this is kind of a compromise proposal. It provides a nice transition from the regional retail that is down where the car dealerships are on Rogers Street now, into the TMU, and then into the traditional single-family and suburban single-family zones that we have there now. I think the zoning anywhere in this city ought to reflect what the type of development that the city wants to see there. Nothing else matters. Property value doesn't matter, tax base doesn't matter. What type of development do we want to see in this particular parcel? That's how we should zone it. Nothing else really matters. And I think that regional retail zone for this particular parcel is not in the best interest of the city. You know, we talk about the Taco Bell. That's how this whole thing kind of got ignited, was the Taco Bell. People say that there were safeguards were in place for the Taco Bell. They were not in place. That was defeated by one vote on this board, and since the underlying zone supported the Taco Bell, you could make a case that Taco Bell could have brought that to court and had it overturned. Happens all the time down here, right? We vote against things, not all the time, but it happens frequently, where we vote in one way, and the applicant takes it to court and has it overturned. You could make an argument that the Taco Bell had a case because the underlying zoning supported that type of development. Fortunately, they didn't do that. Fortunately for the neighborhood, they didn't do that. But it created the realization that if that zone isn't changed, eventually it's going to happen. Eventually those parcels are going to be bundled. Eventually there's going to be the Home Depot-like store there, and it's going to deteriorate the neighborhood. Creep happens. I mean, you know, I've lived here all my life. The neighborhood I grew up in used to be a nice family residential neighborhood. Now, you know, Kentucky Fried Chicken moved in, this fast food moved in. You know, it's not a place that's really that desirable to live anymore because of that kind of creep. And it can happen here as well. It will happen unless we do something about it. So I think that the zone already reflects the characteristics of TMU. We're not making a change. We're trying to keep it the same. It's not a dangerous precedent. You know, a lot of people have maligned this neighborhood group for trying to make this change, but I applaud them. I think that they have really hung with this and are driving to try and keep their neighborhood safe. We need more groups and more people in the city that are willing to try and do that. And I think they actually speak what they're saying is the same thing I'm hearing from a lot of residents who are not down here. It's not going to affect just the people who abut this zone. It'll affect the whole neighborhood. Once it starts, it'll affect the whole neighborhood. And you want to talk about deteriorating the tax base? If Belvedere that creep starts happening in Belvedere, that tax base will deteriorate for sure. So I would encourage, I think we need to send a positive recommendation to the city council on this. I think a vote needs to take place. We can't drag this along any longer. I would encourage my colleagues to recommend that we change this from a from a regional retail to TMU as proposed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other board members have any comments? Mr. Malovich?
Yeah, I live around this neighborhood, and I have for 30 odd years. Rogers Street is a two-lane road. There's lots of turning traffic daily. It's very congested. It behaves like a neighborhood service area. It should be treated like a neighborhood service area. It's not a regional retail area for anyone. Traffic is going to increase every day. I remember when I was taking a transportation course in college, my professor said there will be more cars on the road tomorrow than there are today, and that is true. So it's going to get more intense as things go on. But we need to preserve the neighborhood character of that area. It's consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. We need to continue, which one point says in the comprehensive plan that we need to continue to revise zoning to align things with evolving neighborhoods. In the last 8 years, there has been no proposal except for the Taco Bell to be brought forth in that neighborhood for a large regional retail use. The one thing to point out is there's not much difference between regional retail and traditional mixed use, except for the drive-through restaurant issue. In fact, some of the existing houses on Rogers Street that are slowly being converted to commercial uses can be renovated into residential units under the traditional mixed-use designation, where it's prohibited under the RR designation. I don't see any net loss here. I'm going to support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Malovich. Mr. Boyle?
Mr. Chairman, I'm very much in listening mode at this point. Are there any other members that have any comments?
Mr. Fischett, do you want to go next?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, this has been before us for quite some time now, and I just want to kind of, if everybody can bear with me, just to go back in time a little bit. And I think Mr. Malovich alluded to that, but the recent update to the master plan and the Sustainable Lowell 2025, Chapter 3, there is a bullet item, and it's titled, Prioritize Land Use Policies That Promote Walkable, Well-Networked Neighborhoods. And there's a bullet item that says, explore the creation of a new commercial zoning district for areas that are not well aligned with either regional retail or neighborhood business. And part of the reason for that being in there is actually it was recognized by this body and the Division of Planning and Development that Rogers Street as well as Middlesex Street has some challenges relative to the conflicts between the residential area of the neighborhood and the regional retail. And one of the better corridors that really have transitional zoning is Bridge Street. And regarding setting precedents, I believe it was 7 or 8 years ago, the Dunkin' Donuts that you see there now with the DCU on Bridge Street, the owners of that property came before us for a zoning change, and there was quite a battle that took place with the neighborhood and the proponents. But it was really taking a look at the zoning along that strip, and recognizing that there were some shortcomings. And this body and the city council and DPD does that regularly. That is part of addressing evolving needs of a municipality. So I don't believe that it's setting any dangerous precedent of what we're looking at this point. And if you look at the master plan, the original master plan, and even the update, the neighborhood character is high in the priority for the residents here in the city of Lowell. Now, the delicate balance is obviously supporting the commercial and business development and preserving the quality of life within our neighborhoods. And if we lose the neighborhoods that support the residents who are the backbone of this city, then obviously we've weakened the strength of the community, and I sincerely believe that. Also, if you look at, and it's been a very hot issue lately, obviously, is the importance of economic development within the city. I think this evening, Mr. Genman did a good job articulating the status of that particular strip of road when you compare the regional retail with the TMU, and it's traditional mixed use, and make no mistake about it, it's a zoning district that allows businesses. And there's 114 identified uses within the table of uses, and it's basically 11 changes in one direction and 12 changes in the other. I have talked to some appraisers, and I think there is certainly some concern as to the potential development of some sites. I think after the last public hearing and the input that we received, that's why what we have before us is, when you look at the intent of what was being presented here, it was trying to preserve and trying to address the potential conflicts between the residential portion of the neighborhood and the commercial portion. And when you look at the portion of the rezone that was included, that we have now carved out, it abutted the light industry. So certainly that didn't meet the intent of what was trying to be accomplished, and therefore a correction was made. Now, having said this, at one of our prior meetings, and I don't know if anybody watches us on a regular basis, but we did vote, and the DPD, as part of their action items from the update to the master plan, is, even with a vote here and a vote by the city council, whatever the outcome may be, is to do a comprehensive study of this corridor and the Middlesex Street corridor. The timeline, I believe, Aaron, correct me, I think at the time we were discussing probably 8 months before we would be looking at some results from that.
Greg, we're looking for a package of zoning amendments that would be prepared as a draft document in March or April of this coming year.
And I think, without knowing what the outcome of that's going to be, it may even be a hybrid of the TMU zone that is more appropriate for this particular site. The question is, and I actually spoke to Aaron as far as what some of the concerns would be, and there's certainly, you can put moratoriums on a zoning district if in fact it's part of a process in which you are going to have some recommendations as to either a new zone or some amended version of what currently exists. I really look at this as really a way of addressing that in anticipation of the analysis that will be conducted by DPD. So I really, at this point, and again, I know people have been watching the vote closely, and the vote's been, I think, basically 3-2 as we've been dealing with this issue. And my biggest concern was having that information. But I really believe that based on what we've carved out, based on the facts of clearly this hasn't come out of the blue, and in the neighborhood group, certainly, they were concerned after the Taco Bell, but it was clearly in the city document, too, that we recognized that there were some challenges with this corridor as well as Middlesex Street. So this didn't really come out of nowhere and come out of just the neighborhood. It was something that was recognized by the city planners and recognized by this board, and I think it is something that this is the first step really in addressing the corridors that I mentioned. So, having said that, I certainly would recommend a positive recommendation based on what's before us this evening, with the understanding that there is going to be a process that will take place. My understanding, I've participated in this, and I had a moment of silence at the beginning of this meeting, and Mr. Souza, God bless him, we spent a lot of hours on committee meetings. And again, Mr. Boyle can attest to that. And matter of fact, we came out with basically no recommendation on a particular area that was hotly contested. But there needs to be a process where the businesses are involved as well. And I think there needs to be some understanding that, and again, I think Mr. Gentleman did a good job this evening explaining there really is, the net difference is negligible to some extent. Now, again, having said that, I believe there needs to be some input from the businesses and the residents as we go forward to really come up with something that's going to work in both those corridors. And we recognize that, and those are challenges that we've worked with on Bridge Street. There's several different zones, if you look at the zoning map along Bridge Street, to really accommodate the character of the neighborhood as it changes. And I think that it's appropriate for these two corridors. So having said all of that, Mr. Chairman, I certainly would vote in favor of the recommendation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fischett. Mr. Bulley, you want to speak next, or want me to speak?
Yes, and
Okay. Just a couple of things. First of all, there's a lot of things said about precedent. We don't set precedent. It's very clear. The land court has told us that on cases sent back to us, and the Massachusetts Appeals Court has told us the same thing. Not by cases that were sent up by us, but cases that we referred to. To have precedent, you need two set of facts that are exactly the same with two different parties. The Massachusetts Land Court and the Appeals Court have both said each piece of property, every address that every one of us lives in, is unique and is different. So if we have a zone change for 52, say Main Street, and someone comes in for 54 Main Street, and if we voted for one, not the other, that is not precedent, because the different address, it's separate and distinct. So therefore, regardless what we do not set precedent, because land is unique, and we're taught that in law school back when we take equity. So it's unique, and that's why when you come to cases in land court, it's all about specific performance and not just money. If you have a purchase and sale agreement, and if you want to go into land court and ask for specific performance, they ask you either you have to sell the property or you don't. They don't put a dollar value on it. So precedent, everybody spoke about, regardless of what we do not set precedent. That is very clear, because land is unique, and when it comes to land use, each piece of property is separate and distinct, and therefore, regardless of what we do, we don't set precedent. In regards to a zoning change, anybody can propose a zoning change. We do them all the time. The city council does them all the time. We just do them as a recommending body on the land use, but anybody can get together, petition the planning board or the city council to do a zone change. They have the right to go forward. If they own the piece of property or have any standing, people have a right to protect their property one way or another, so anybody can go forward in regards to a zone change. So therefore, saying that, what I said about precedent, and we've had a case that came back to us before, which was Westview Road. Land court said, the attorney argued that we did things in other sites. And the land court judge says, give me an example. The lawyer couldn't give an example. Then the judge says, even if they did, it doesn't count because you can't use precedent because the land is unique. So it was cited to us and was sent back to us several times. The matter of the grandfathering in, I believe that most of all these businesses that are there now are still allowed to operate, whether they're in the TMU or the regional retail. When the zoning came before us the first time, the regional retail, there was a bigger request to encroach in the TMU down into regional retail. After further review, this part of the land was reduced down for the TMU. What the TMU is for, a traditional mixed-use neighborhood. It's for businesses and neighborhoods to work together with the ultimate idea of the neighbors going to these businesses. In the case of this nature here, all the people in this neighborhood, in most of these businesses I do attend, because I live in this neighborhood, do get all the majority of their business from the neighborhood. So under the TMU is indicated, it's not a taking, you still would be allowed to do the exact same business as that you have there today, but what it would prevent would be basically, by reading the land use chart, would be the drive-throughs. Then those would be the only two that would be grandfathered in. So by saying that, I think this is a better plan than what came before us the first time, reducing it down. And by this here, it allows everybody who's in the zone, including the people who are presently in the regional retail, who are non-conforming, it brings them into conforming. And I think this one, this is a much better plan, and as indicated, I think the TMU is for the mixed use, where we have the business in being accompanied by the neighborhood plans. So that's all I have to say at this point. Mr. Boyle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel like I have a very good understanding of the proponents' concerns about this and interests on this. I feel like to make a good decision on this, I need three pieces of information: the proponent's case, the opponent's case, and the data. And I only feel like I have a solid understanding of one of those things, the proponent's case. Mr. Theodoro, could you come up to the podium? Counselor, thank you. How closely have you looked into the zoning implications, the implications of this zoning change for your client's property?
Well, what I do know is that if this zoning is changed, there's no pre-existing use. It's a residential use there right now. Mm-hmm. So there is no pre-existing use that is grandfathered in. That a proposed change for a commercial use is going to be, it could be prohibited. However, what we have right now, my client's property is not in this zoning change.
Okay.
My client's property is across the street.
Okay.
So my client's property was in the prior zoning change, but we're not in this right now.
Okay.
We're just standing in line with the other commercial owners right here.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well,
So 683 Rogers Street is my client's property. It's still zoned RR.
Okay.
Across the street.
So I'm sorry, Joe, if I can, so then what is your interest?
We're standing objecting to this zoning change in line with the other commercial property owners.
Okay. All right, well, then eliminate the specific property in question.
But
how closely have you looked?
One thing that when this was proposed before and they were talking about changing it from the RR to the traditional mixed use, it does have an impact on our property. When we're talking about not being able to place a potential, if there's a sale or we want to place a potential buyer there, we would not be able to have a drive-through. So that has an impact on a proposed sale. That has an impact on the value of the property, and we felt that was significant. Now, granted, and I think part of this argument here, if some of these property owners currently have a right to go ahead and compile lots in question, and they have a right to do that right now. If they choose to go ahead and develop property, they have a right to go ahead and compile the lots in question for a proposed sale. Now, they wouldn't be able to do that with the TMU. The retail use over, I believe, 5,000 square feet requires a variance. So their property, they're diminishing their property rights in that regard. Now, the strict scrutiny of this board, where they have to go ahead and propose and bring in any proposed development and bring it in for site plan review, in my opinion, is an adequate control. Whatever someone proposes here is going to have to bring in front of you for site plan review. And I believe that that's an adequate control. The strict scrutiny of this board and what this board mandates only betters a project. Now, I think what you have happened in the past over here is something was almost passed and it was almost done by one vote. And that, I believe, this community here, which is pretty much composed of, and I'm not derogating the rights of the property owners to come in and propose something and to present something, and that's why we're all here, to present our interests and to present our points of view. But this planning board is here to put controls on that. And in my opinion, that's a strict scrutiny to pass, and that's adequate.
So do you think it would be accurate to say, in terms of your concerns about what the commercial property owners would lose, your concern is that larger retail uses would go from site plan review to special permit, and that certain retail uses, for example, drive-through use, would no longer be allowed?
I believe that's part of it. That wouldn't be allowed, and I believe that's part of the review of this planning board if any economic development was presented to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you touched upon something a little bit earlier, and that was talking about data. I think, if I remember correctly, a member of this board talked about whether or not property values would be affected, and they talked about, and that goes to the issue of data. What information is out there to show that the property values would be impacted? That's a significant factor for these commercial property owners. Now, I understand them preserving the neighborhoods and that the neighborhoods have to work part and parcel with the business interests, but I don't think there's been any data presented to determine whether or not there's been what detrimental impact that would have on the commercial property owners.
Thank you. One last brief question. In your consideration about the consequences of this zoning change for the economic interests of the commercial property owners, did you take into account that it makes multifamily residential an allowed use instead of a banned use? And doesn't that expand their?
I understand that with respect to, I mean, and that is something that may impact it, but again, that remains to be seen. What revenue would be drawn from multifamily development as opposed to other larger commercial development? Now, I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know the answer to that, and perhaps some information, appraisal information from realtors. We hear it from both sides. We hear that this is commercially neutral, that it really doesn't have an effect. And then, meaning that this proposed zoning change, to change it to TMU, doesn't have any effect, that it's economically neutral as far as that's concerned. I disagree with that, and I believe that it would be detrimental. And perhaps that should be investigated. And I understand that some of the points that were made with respect to the master plan in problem areas that were drawn up, and I seem to recall a part of the master plan that slated this area, specifically the intersection of Rogers Street and Phoenix Ave, in the master plan for commercial development. And I think that if they're discussing commercial development, I'm just drawing an inference from that they're not talking about building multifamily housing over there, that it's retail development.
That's, thank you very much, Counselor. Mr. Stylus, do you own property in the affected area?
My mother does.
Okay.
I would be the beneficiary afterwards, but...
That property is no
mother's-
longer in the affected area, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
No longer in the affected area?
That's right.
Okay. Your what I heard was, I'm trying to understand the opponent's fears here. All right. What I understood.
So if I may,
go ahead.
I have every right as a taxpayer of the city and as somebody who wants to and understands the position of the other owners, just like the residents have their opinion about these businesses. Well, I have an opinion about those businesses too. It differs from what this ordinance relates. So I do have that right to come up and say I disagree with this zoning change, correct?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So
I'm trying to understand the position as well as I can.
Yeah, my position is of fairness. I think I'm a small business owner. I know what it takes to put a successful business there. I know what it takes to be able to provide for a successful, long-running income for my family. I think these folks also deserve that right. They've had that right. I think this negatively impacts their ability to live their American dream, if you will. So it's just in terms of, we're not affected by it anymore based on this ordinance, but that doesn't change my opinion because I still feel these are valid points.
Okay, but what I'm trying to understand is what you think this zoning change would do to negatively affect the commercial.
I think from my discussions, and again, this is the point that I'm trying to, and I think Attorney Theodora said, where is the evidence on either side of that issue of how does this impact the values of these properties? I mean, data that will either support or confirm what happens to the properties if this zoning changes. Has that been done by the DPD? I'm not a realtor, but I can tell you, talking with realtors, it's all anecdotal. Mine is anecdotal, just like anybody who's on the other side of it. So in terms of what I'm asking for is evidence-based, just like we do in our health studies. What's the evidence? Not the hearsay, not the opinions, but what is the evidence base? And I've yet to hear any kind of, professional review by people that are dealing with real estate values, commercial versus residential. My anecdotal inference tells me that anything that makes it harder for a business to get their proposal on there drives the costs up, which means that it makes the project less valuable.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is, if it's revenue neutral, where is that information that says that? And I don't know. I haven't heard anybody say there's been this study done with these results. All I've heard is opinions. That includes mine. I'm just asking the board: are you making decisions based on fact-based evidence versus anecdotal?
So my interest as a taxpayer is, when I'm making a decision on whether I'm for or against something, is, okay, first question is, where are the important points here, and where is the data that supports or contradicts?
Okay, thank you,
All
sir.
right.
Thank you for coming tonight. Mr. Chairman, I agree very much that there needs to be a serious planning study done of this corridor to determine its ultimate disposition. The city needs to make as informed a decision as possible. We need to know what would be the tax base implications, what would be the economic implications for this group of property owners and that group of property owners. I am pleased to hear that the planning office is going to be going ahead with such an effort. Regardless of the action taken on this particular zoning amendment, would that be correct, Aaron?
We are looking at corridors throughout the city that need, or we feel that needs to be revisited based on a lot of the same kind of concerns that were discussed for this corridor. It's mentioned earlier, the Bridge Street, particularly the northern limit of it towards Drake, as well as Middlesex Street. This is another regional retail district. All three of them are regional retail that are very intertwined with the residential neighborhood that is abutting them, and actually have a very, I guess, symbiotic relationship in many ways, but also some challenges primarily due to traffic and scale of commercial development. So we do plan on looking at multiple corridors. Admittedly, this discussion will make it more challenging to have a broad-based discussion for this corridor. Changing the zoning code in increments, although I understand that there's benefit to that because there is an immediate reaction or there's immediate action taken on concerns, but it will challenge the discourse in thinking about what are the multitude of options that are available to businesses on the corridor and the residents that are adjacent to the district. But it will be looked at. How that will play out, though, after this discussion is hard to tell.
Yeah, that is a concern of mine. Regardless of what happens on this particular zoning amendment, there's going to be a process that will involve looking at this corridors and looking at other corridors. I personally hope to be closely involved in that process. This issue of the interface between the regional retail districts and abutting residential neighborhoods and how they can play nice together is a particular interest of mine as planning issues go. And so whatever action happens before the council on this, based on our recommendation, will not be the end of this process that's going on here. It will be an interim step to deal with an immediate situation. I think that it would not, Chairman Linehan spoke about how our actions do not set precedents in one sense. I feel like it is important to reiterate that we should not view this step tonight as a precedent in a different sense, which is that this is not the final word on the matter. This is not the planning process to determine how this particular location or locations like this should ultimately be rezoned. And so I'd like the commercial property owners to know that regardless of what happens, their concerns will have a venue for being incorporated, and the data-driven analysis behind a planning and zoning decision will still have an avenue to come into this process. I am of the opinion, based partially on what staff said, also based on my own experience as a planner, that taking an action on this could negatively affect that larger process. And that larger process is the better process. I am inclined to think that to think that the map as presented is close to the right map. There's this area and then there's that area. And I think that what is proposed here does a better job delineating what this area is. That is the area adjacent to the residential uses that draws on mainly a local clientele from this other area, the true regional retail area. What I feel less confident about is in saying that TMU zoning, as it currently exists in our zoning code, is the right zone for this area. Partially because of how it might restrict future development opportunities, but mainly because I just feel like I do not know what the implications are. And so I would recommend, I would like to see a recommendation that the City Council table this action, table this proposal until the planning process can be conducted. But regardless of whether they choose to do so, I still feel that it's important that the board put its full support behind such a planning process and not consider this to be any sort of a final action.
Jim, can I make one more
Sure.
comment?
Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
I just wanted to make a brief comment. I don't understand, and I don't think it is true, that the change of this parcel to TMU, because it's the zone that we have that most closely resembles what's there, and an analysis of corridors in a potential new zone are mutually exclusive. I think that is a long process. It's a process that should happen. But in the interim, in an effort to protect the neighborhood, the TMU zone most closely resembles what is there and what will provide insulation for the neighborhood. So I think it makes sense to go forward with this without impacting the effort that the DPD has underway. The second thing I wanted to say is that the attorney mentioned that he felt that site plan review, which any development there would have to have and before this board, would be adequate to address any concerns. Well, everybody on this board knows that at site plan review, we have two options: approve or approve with conditions. Denial is not an option. Site plan review is not an appropriate vehicle by which we would, stop a drive-through fast food, place like Taco Bell. So I just wanted to make those 2 points. And Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion that we recommend approval. We recommend that the City Council, we positively recommend that the City Council, approve this zoning change.
Mr. Chairman, before make a second on that, could I just ask Aaron to just explain something conversation I had with him, just I guess for the benefit of everybody here.
Sure.
Yeah, just there is an extreme challenge in trying to come up with an economic impact study of the results of something like this, and I did have a discussion with Aaron, and I know there was some focus on the potential. We talked about having data, but I think we may be awaiting data that may be very difficult to get. So Aaron, if you could just kind of talk a little bit about the challenges of an economic impact as it relates to this, and that's all. I think for everybody's benefit.
Sure. The conversation that you and I had was what the scope of an economic impact analysis might include, and how that would be developed in the context of this zoning amendment. There are a number of variables for a number of different parcels. Usually when you have a fiscal impact analysis, you can look at some general principles. You can look at specific parcels that have zoning amendments where have different uses that are allowed, and different regulations such as parking, dimensional standards. It is a rather lengthy and in-depth analysis to get any detail out of that I think that the board is looking for, and that has been expressed at the meeting tonight. That kind of analysis doesn't do a very good job at looking at all the different variables in this case. For instance, whether or not a drive-through is allowed, if it's allowed by special permit, if it's not allowed in that district. The parking requirements. So TMU has a lower requirement for parking for restaurant retail. That is going to have a beneficial impact in terms of value for a lot of commercial properties there. As it was mentioned earlier, you can have multifamily mixed-use properties in a TMU district. How would that impact the value of properties? And all of those have a sliding scale, meaning they separately impact the value of the property differently based on the location of the property, the size of the property, and other benefits that the property might have, such as frontage on two different streets. So to come up with a economic impact analysis that would provide a detail for each single property owner on what their impact on property value is based on the proposed zoning change to TMU is difficult at best, and something that DPD wouldn't be able to provide to the planning board or the city council in this case in a timely manner. And frankly, for a corridor study for the commercial districts that we talked about earlier, we're not looking at that level of detail in that study either. We're looking at talking about the needs and concerns that the residents have and the commercial property owners have on the corridor to understand what they want to see for their properties, and identifying what is a best zoning amendment, if zoning amendment is the proper course of action, that could help the businesses achieve success on that corridor, and implement the fact that the master plan viewed that corridor as a commercial district, and also preserve the neighborhood character and the quality of life of residents in the residential neighborhoods that surround it. It's more about the land use and how the land is used rather than the economic impact on the property owner. Because ultimately what zoning is trying to do is implement the vision of the master plan. And so part of that is really digging into the needs of the people who are living in the neighborhood and the commercial businesses who are operating there.
Thank you. So that is, because again, I want to make it clear, that is not data that we will be getting. That is not be part of this analysis. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll second Mr. Gendron's motion.
Okay, we have a motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes yes. In opposition? Okay, so the motion carries. As indicated, this is only a recommendation. The final determination will be made at a public hearing before the Lowell City Council. Aaron, do we have a date set for that yet for the council agenda by any chance? Would you know?
I believe it's next Tuesday.
Okay.
Which is
So I believe then the matter will be taken up at the Lowell City Council meeting right here next
12th,
Tuesday.
November
This is
12th.
November 12th.
12th?
Yes, just trying to do the math. Yeah, November 12th.
And as indicated, our recommendation is not a binding recommendation. The city council can do what they feel fit in their ultimate wisdom. I want to thank everybody for coming down and testifying this evening. It gives us a lot of input in regards to making our decision, and thank you all very much.
Chairman, can I just ask, who seconded that motion?
Jerry.
Jerry, and was that 5-0?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
He's not affected by this. Presently. His mother's property is not affected.
Yeah, I don't personally, I just wanted to understand what his concern is.
This is human nature. Everybody is looking for zillion dollar lot over here. And there's certain things that are or not going to happen. If we can't solve downtown space,
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a nice night.
Okay. So, moving along from other business, Aaron, we have some A&R reports?
Yes, I believe we sent those out in the packets, but there were two A&Rs over
Okay.
the last couple of weeks. One was Chase Ave. I'll just real quickly. Chase Ave was a one lot that was subdivided to create one additional single-family lot in the TSF zoning district. And Westford was essentially, in the end, only combining three separate lots that are currently, one residential structure is currently on to create one lot, and the other lot that was a part of that A&R was where the, it's the Shanahan Electric building is.
Yep.
I think in Westford. And
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Stevens, I believe, is the intersecting street. So it was essentially what was already there on plan, but the attorney who,
They used
for
to
the
sell all
property.
sorts of TVs in there, then it turned into a law office, then it was a donor shop next door.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's still,
Yep.
but it was basically confirming the the differences between the lot and the residential and commercial property.
Aaron, do you have plans we can look at?
I do. I can email them to you. I don't have them with me right now.
Okay. Yes, if you, I would appreciate it if you could do that, and if you could make a habit of that, regular practice of that in the future, because there's only so much you can follow in a narrative.
Absolutely agree with that,
I have a master's degree in this, and I can't figure this out from the narrative.
Yes, we can provide a plan.
This is a very visual business we're in. It's,
So we don't take any action on the A&R anyways, just place it on file, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Moving along, you have the bylaw revisions? Is that something we're going to?
If we could push that off a little bit,
Okay.
we have it drafted up, but I'm
Right.
looking to get it reviewed
Okay.
by the solicitor's office.
So we have any other notices from budding towns that did big concern with? I don't see
Nothing,
anything about
nothing
moving along,
that's
okay.
going to affect the
Is
city.
there any general correspondence from any other board members, any updates from planning staff? Mr. Fischett, I'll start with you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just briefly, last week we had the last official meeting of the Rourke Bridge Wood Street Corridor Advisory Group, the last.
So the bridge is done?
No, I wish I could announce that. I wish I could announce that. But at this point, it's on to the next step, and which is sending it to Mass DOT. I believe NEMCOG will be working in conjunction with the city engineer department to get that started, and to get the first step of the environmental review started, and at that point, look to finish the environmental review process, which is a lengthy process. Could take up to 2 years. But again, and they're looking to form another committee to take it to the next level. But I think what's very, very important for anybody, for all of us, anybody that's listening, is our elected officials have to keep this on the front burner, have to help to make this a priority in order to get the funding and move forward. And based on what I heard, I really believe that within 10 years, I think we could see this. But again, it has to be on the front burner. It has to be a priority. So again, that'll be the last update I will give you from the advisory committee.
Mr. Fischett, I came in, I joined the board sort of in the middle of this process. What was the scope of the advisory board's
Well, there was a working committee which was really city engineer Eric Eby, Adam Bakey, the members of NEMCOG. There was, I think, some engineers from some of the surrounding towns, and then there was the advisory committee. So the role of the advisory committee was really, after the work of the working committee, we would be presented with what was going to be ultimately presented at the public meetings. And they were looking for any input from us at that point, whether there should be anything added as far as the public process, and then the results of the public process. So from, again, as the very word advisory, we didn't have any really authority in this process, but certainly there were representatives from Chelmsford and Dracut, which are in Tingsboro, towns that were obviously had some interest in this as well. But that was really the extent of the advisory committee.
I see. Okay, then maybe this, my next question would be better addressed to the planning office. Would any of the work that was done be in the Wood Street corridor study be useful for us to understand in the review of, for instance, an automobile-intensive proposal on Wood Street?
Yes, yeah, in fact, I believe a number of the recommendations in the early draft that was prepared for the corridor were used for the charter school project that was reviewed. There's some improvements at the intersection of Wood and Middlesex, and then on the northern side of the bridge. There are recommendations, there are near, midterm, and long-term recommendations for the entire corridor in the document that NIMCOG is preparing, or has VHB preparing for NIMCOG. And all of those start from Drumhill, Princeton Boulevard, Wood, Westford and Wood, going across the bridge. And those short-term recommendations absolutely could be considered as part of any development project that will likely have an impact on the traffic for that corridor. So yes is the short answer.
Now, when you say recommendations about the corridor, you're referring to traffic improvements in the right-of-way to be implemented?
Yes.
Okay. Again, I'm not familiar with the scope of these efforts, but what did the Wood Street corridor study look at? Did it look just at improvements in the right-of-way, or did it have a land use element as well?
There's a land use element, but I don't believe it makes any recommendations relative to land use and how that would impact the traffic in the corridor. It takes the existing land use regulations to extrapolate what the future conditions might be, based on, there's the ITE standards for trip generation for those land uses along the entire corridor. It also looks at number of residential properties in that corridor and how they're going to be that's where the origination is going to come from, a lot of those trips. So it looks at the existing regulations, not really making any proposals for land use, changes to land use regulations. It does make recommendations, specific recommendations to the intersections, like striping, putting in, video detection, which was one of the things that happened at the charter school, as a result of the charter school approval. So those kinds of detailed recommendations in the short term, most of those are short term. Midterm and long term get into things like widening portions of the corridor and obviously replacing the bridge.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, anybody else have any other further updates?
The only thing I'll say is just for the next meeting, we'll have packets out by next Monday at the latest. We're shooting for Friday because of the holiday. 295 Varnum, it's Lowell General Hospital, has submitted a site plan review for the temporary parking lot. The board may recall that was something that came to you a little while back, maybe 2 years now. They're looking to make that permanent. So that's a site plan review process. 585 Merrimack Street, which is the Jeanne d'Arc bank branch, has submitted a minor amendment to the original approved plan. Basically, the long and short of it is there's a underground vault that National Grid is requiring them to install on the site that is impacting the parking layout. They'll lose one parking space. There was a pedestrian pathway leading out to Moody Street on the, the west side of the property? West side of the property, away from the canal. That'll have to be removed. So some minor changes there. And then there has been a zoning rezone petition for Andrews Street, Andrew and Moore. There's the Sacred Heart School. I'm sure that's not what the name of the school was when it was
Right across the street from the church there where the parking lot is.
Sacred Heart School, isn't
I think it was a grade school.
So the schools, there has been a prospective buyer for the property to turn it into residential. What they're looking to do is actually tear down the school and build a number of, I think it's between 6 or 8 two-family buildings. And so they needed, what they're seeking is a rezone from traditional single-family to traditional two-family. And so that's for a public hearing on the 18th, and I believe that the city council has scheduled it for December 2nd. The first meeting in December, which actually I think is December 3rd. Yeah.
And then we have what we did continue this evening, right?
And then one, yeah, correct.
Okay. Any further comments? If not, we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion's made in
Seconded.
second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We have adjourned. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.